Hi, I'm Greg Crawford with the Friday News Dump, brought to you by World News Trust. This week, Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid touched off a big bang when he finally invoked what everyone calls the nuclear option to combat the habitual abuse of the filibuster by Senate Republicans. So now we have to endure listening to sanctimonious pundits from every side mispronounce the word nuclear as nuclear. You would think that adults in positions of responsibility would make an effort to correctly pronounce a word so common in present-day political discourse. Whatever. If you've been living under a rock for the past several years, a filibuster is an arcane Senate rule that allows members of the minority party to sandbag an initiative introduced by the majority party. A senator can obstruct debate of a bill or a nominee with which he or she takes issue by talking incessantly to prevent a vote on the bill or nominee in question, such as a candidate for a federal judgeship. But now, a conservative senator with a bug up his ass doesn't even have to actually hold the floor for hours on end. He can just threaten to hold his breath until he turns purple, and the bill or nominee is considered filibustered. Now, I am not kidding. Republicans have, in the eyes of many, abused the filibuster, which does not appear anywhere in the Constitution, by the way, to hold up President Obama's nominations in unprecedented numbers. The qualifications of the nominees are not in question. They just don't like President Obama, so they behave like petulant children. This is not the way responsible adults conduct themselves in any circumstances, and certainly not when we're paying them to make critical decisions regarding affairs of state. And responsible adults do not tell brazen and patently obvious lies to justify their actions. But responsible adults is not a phrase that can be used to describe Republicans. The so-called nuclear option refers to changing a Senate rule by a simple majority of 51 votes, rather than a supermajority of 60 votes. The Senate rule in the Bombardier's crosshairs was the aforementioned filibuster. By changing the rules to allow a filibuster to be overridden by a simple majority, the Democrats can now bring nominations to a floor vote without having to bribe any Republicans with candy. Senate Republicans could have avoided this by being reasonable people and choosing their battles, saving their obstruction for issues of some substance. But reasonable people is not a phrase that can be used to describe Republicans either. But 'twas not ever thus. There was a time when it was possible to hammer out differences between the two parties because they ultimately shared the same goal, to govern fairly. Or at least occasionally fairly, sometimes. All right, fine. On days beginning with the letter Q. But then the pathological selfishness that is the fundamental premise of all conservative thought got a cheerleader in the form of one Elisa Rosenbaum. You would know her better as Ayn Rand, a third-rate novelist who spewed vitriolic contempt for working people and altruism of any sort whatsoever, and praised the ruthless psychopaths that had poisoned free enterprise with the unrestrained greed of rapacious capitalism, elevating them to a perverted pantheon of self-proclaimed demigods. The disrespect exhibited towards President Obama by Republicans is also unprecedented. There can be no doubt that a fair amount of this malice is racially motivated. But the overall civility of political discourse has deteriorated over the past 30 years, in no small measure as a direct result of the abolition of the Fairness Doctrine by President Reagan. Okay, here's the deal. In theory, at least, the airwaves belong to the American people. Our elected officials are tasked with the job of overseeing, administering, and protecting such resources on behalf of the American people, in theory. In practice, however, as soon as a Republican gets control of such resources, it's a free-for-all, and his cronies line up at the trough like hogs. Now, the Fairness Doctrine dictated that every radio or TV station that expressed an opinion on any given subject was legally obligated to offer equal time to someone with an opposing viewpoint. The airwaves belonged to all Americans, and everyone had a right to be heard, no matter how loony they might be. But right-wingers loathe the very thought of true democracy, and Captain Jellybean was easily persuaded to throw the Fairness Doctrine in the wood chipper. And while he was at it, he'd get away with restrictions on foreign entities owning American media outlets. And then along came Rupert Murdoch. This Aussie asshole thinks Attila the Hun was a liberal. And lo, he begat Fox News. And it was equal time, schmeequal time. Fox News was his personal mouthpiece for the rebirth of the Third Reich, Murdoch style, and boy howdy, no goddamn liberal pussies were going to get a second of airtime on his news channel. unless, of course, they were sacrificed as fresh meat for Bill Cut His Mike O'Reilly. And then things went down from there, downhill fast. Any pretense of good manners or even a modicum of civility was considered a weakness to be exploited and bullied into submission. They tried and true technique of shouting down anyone with the temerity to disagree had been employed to great effect by Nazi brown shirts. Teabaggers said, "Hey, that sounds like fun." They also weren't about beating up diminutive female reporters. Nobody had the balls to call them out, so they kept escalating their belligerence until it was so ingrained in nightly newscasts that people became inured to the outrageous trampling of the First Amendment rights of others. Now, these malicious creeps now infest the House of Representatives like cockroaches, and a frightening number have found their way into the Senate. Democracy's fundamental precept of compromise is considered anathema to T-publicans, and weasels like Rand Paul have publicly expressed any doubt that democracy is such a great idea in the first place. After all, says Mr. Paul, democracy gave us slavery. Say what? Sweet mother of Christ, there are actually people who believe this crap. That constipated tortoise from Kentucky, Senator Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, has said that Democrats will regret resorting to the nuclear option come the midterms. But I suspect that the T-publicans' relentless string of psychotic temper tantrums has exposed them as the malicious fools incapable of governing that they really are, and those Americans still capable of rational thought, including many conservatives, have decided that enough is enough, and frothing at the mouth right-wing fanatics will be frog-marched out of Congress and into well-deserved obscurity. At least I sure as hell hope so.